What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here with the team at Awesemo, back again to talk some college football DFS. We are going to be talking the Friday slate. We have 4 games up, 4 games down, and we will get to everything you need to know about the slate. Before we do, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We'll be taking you behind the glass, showing you some of our player usage tools. We also have projections, ownership projections, everything you need to know about college football DFS on the site. So make sure to check that out. We have a 4-game slate, and we are going to dive right into it. First game we have to talk about is probably the best one on the slate. It is Marshall against North Texas. This game has a 66.5 point total. Marshall is an 11-point favorite in this spot, and there are significant matchups to exploit on both sides. Marshall has an enormous team total, nearly 39 points. And starting with Marshall, they're a team that's a little different this year. They're running with a little more pace, and they're far, far pass heavier. That's allowed Grant Wells to become a premier quarterback and one of the best on this slate, even at his expensive price. Wells is averaging 330 passing yards per game. He is somewhat mobile with 30 yards on the ground, and he has clear stacking options at every price point. Not to mention his matchup is pretty solid against North Texas's defense. You can stack him with Corey Gamage, who is their target leader, averaging 86 yards per game, 9.7 targets. Shadid Ahmed and Willie Johnson, they've emerged as the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Their opportunity is fairly consistent. They both actually have 32 targets, and Willie Johnson has seen more targets in the last 4 games than Shadid Ahmed. But when you just isolate the last 2, it's actually been Ahmed with 10 targets in each of the last 2. Both are completely fine to stack with Grant Wells. And the cheapest viable option I'm looking to is Xavier Gaines, $3,900 for Gaines. He's their hyper-athletic tight end. He's actually 3rd on the team in receiving yards, only 5.5 targets per game, but he's a player they used a lot. Even in the run game last year, he had some carries. So he's somebody we can certainly look to. And other players, there's not really much else to say. Jaden Harrison's playing a part-time role, but like Talik Keaton's hurt still, not looking anywhere there. In the run game, Rasheen Ali has seen an immense workload of late. This guy has at least 20 touches in each of the last 4 games. He hasn't been the most efficient, just 93 yards on the ground per game, but 21.5 opportunities. Ali is having an immense season, a very large opportunity share, and North Texas is allowing nearly 200 rushing yards per game. He's viable for sure. On North Texas, you have Austin On taking over for Jace Rutter. And it's a spot where North Texas, they're extremely fast, one of the fastest teams in the country, and they're only slightly below average in terms of pass rate. So there's going to be a lot of volume for whoever plays quarterback. Austin On is flat out too cheap on this slate at 6,800 on DraftKings. He's extremely mobile, 119 rushing yards already this year, and he hasn't started many games. So he automatically stands out as another quarterback we want to target because of mobility. You can also stack him. This North Texas receiving room is getting more and more depleted. They lost Jair Shorter to an injury. Deontay Simpson was dismissed from the team earlier this week. That makes Roderick Burns their clear wide receiver 1, and he's averaging 10.3 targets per game in their last 4. You can play Roderick Burns with confidence. Their tight end, Jacob Pirtle, he should see more volume. Bryson Jackson looks like he's going to step up as the wide receiver 2 in the offense. And outside of that, you're probably going to see some sort of combination between Damon Ward and Ikaya Ragsdale was listed. Excuse me, he's out. That's not who I wanted to mention. It's Zagili McMillan is the wide receiver, like 3/4, splitting time a little bit with Damon Ward. It's a tough situation to project, but there's going to be a lot of cheap opportunity for these receivers for North Texas. So let me recap that again. Accidentally mentioned Ragsdale as the running back. He's actually hurt. Do not play Ragsdale. We'll talk about him in a second. But in the receivers, it's Roderick Burns, number 1. Bryson Jackson should be number 2. And then you should see some combination of Damon Ward and Zagil McMillan as the wide receiver 3. Jason Pirtle is the tight end. In the running back room, okay, now we can talk Ragsdale. He's hurt. He's not going to play in this game. DeAndre Torrey has seen an immense opportunity share for this team. He's averaging 25 touches per game, and that equates to 114 pure rushing yards. And then in the receiving room, he's averaging another 13.5. This guy is just so active in all facets of the game right now. He's really hard to avoid. Seeing more touches just straight up than Ali on the other side. The only issue is they're going to be 11 point underdogs depending on your sports book. However, the matchup is fantastic here too. Marshall's allowing 241 rushing yards per game. DeAndre Torrey can be played with confidence. Matchup number 2, we have Clemson taking on Syracuse. This game has a 45-point total projected for more than 20 points less than the previous matchup. So it's a spot where we're not as excited about. For Clemson, they are very slow, largely due to inefficiency. They're still passing at a 50% clip. DJ Uiagalelei has taken a huge step back. He is using his legs a little bit, but averaging only 158.5 passing yards per game. Wildly inefficient for Uiagalelei. You have to think maybe the leash is getting shorter for him, but he has shown upside last year. He clips 300 yards in his 2 starts, so it is there. You can stack him with Justin Ross or Joseph Nada if you're stacking any of the receivers here. Ross is the target leader, 36 on the year, but Nada has been a little more efficient. He's averaging 66.5 receiving yards per game to Justin Ross's 42. Comfortable with either. Nada is $1,000 cheaper, but Ross is going to be more involved. I think you can play this either way. Ross had limited opportunity in their last game because he sustained a concussion, so don't worry about those 2 targets you see there. The wide receiver 3 is in flux right now. Frank Ladson's battling an injury. He's questionable for the game. EJ Williams is also battling an injury, questionable for the game. And Braden Galloway, he's their tight end. So if Ladson or Williams play, they should function as the wide receiver 3. If they both play, they likely split. If both are out, you are going to see Bo Collins with a larger role in the offense. He's somebody who had 4 targets in their last game and is at the stone minimum. I don't think you need to get there today, but he's somebody worth mentioning. In the run game, which I think is where we can kind of exploit this Clemson team, you have Kobe Pace as the lead rusher, $56,600 as his price. 18 carries in their last game. Freshman Phil Maffa only came in for 8. There's a lot of opportunity here at cheap prices because Will Shipley's still hurt and Lynn J. Dixon transferred out of the program. So you have Kobe Pace potentially handling a major workload at 5,600 as a 13.5 point favorite. Again, low total. Syracuse pretty good against the run, but Shipley just too cheap for this price. Phil Maffa, he's also worth a look in tournaments as he might see more opportunity down the stretch. He's somebody they wanted to redshirt, but now they just can't because of injuries. On Syracuse, Garrett Schrader takes over as signal caller. They are playing even slower, even run heavier under Schrader. He is a pure dual threat, over 130 rushing yards in back-to-back games. He's at least 16 carries in 3 straight games. Not very efficient as a passer, just 104 yards on average, slightly above that if you exclude games. He was a part-time player, but extremely mobile. And it's a tough matchup against Clemson, but Schrader is going to have enough volume on the ground to maybe be a consideration. He's just a little too expensive on DraftKings at $7,500. Would rather look at a different signal caller because Garrett Schrader is essentially a glorified running back. If you want to stack him in contrarian builds, there are cheap receivers. Taj Harris transferred, so Anthony Quealy is the wide receiver 1. Courtney Jackson's the wide receiver 2. And then you're seeing some combination of Sherrod Johnson, Devon Cooper, and Damian Alford functioning as the wide receiver 3. I'm not really targeting any of the ancillary guys, but you could look at Courtney Jackson or Quealy if you'd like. I would prefer not to. In the run game, Sean Tucker is another just immense bell cow running back, extremely efficient, draws perhaps his toughest matchup of the season. He's averaging 24.7 touches per game, 134 rushing yards, and he's actually the team's 4th most targeted receiver, averaging another 33 yards through the air. His price is more expensive than guys like Torrey or Ali, so that's where I tend to lean, but Tucker has essentially the same volume as those players, just a really low total, an extremely low team total, but his volume has been so good that he needs to be considered. Going to Cal, Oregon, another middling game for DFS to below average, 54-point total. Oregon's a 14.5-point favorite. The best matchup in the game is probably Cal in the pass game. We'll see if they're able to exploit it. Cal is very slow this year, largely due to inefficiency. They're slightly below average in pace. They're passing the ball a ton, basically out of necessity. They're a team that has struggled to win games this year. Oregon is slightly above average in pace, but they're very run heavy, which makes sense with their dual threat signal caller. On the Cal side, Chase Garbers, that is, has had volume on his side. He's averaging 250 pass yards per game on 34 attempts. He's just wildly inefficient. But Garbers can always fall back on his mobility. He has 191 rushing yards this year. And I would rather play Garbers on this slate than guys like Garrett Schrader at a much more expensive price. Volume will be there for Garbers. In the run game, they have moved somewhat away from Damian Moore. He was benched in their last game. And they moved more towards Christopher Brooks, Chris Street, those type of players. Any way you shake this, it's going to be a 4-way timeshare between Moore, Brooks, Marcel Dancy, and Chris Street. I would rather just play one of the clear bell cows we have than try to take a stab on Cal's backfield. If you're stacking Garbers, which I think you could do in tournaments, or if you're even just running someone back from the Oregon side, the number one receiver has been Nico Remigio on the year. He actually has played a little bit less than Trayvon Clark and Kekoa Crawford recently. Trayvon Clark and Kekoa Crawford have been way more efficient on their volume. Remigio just leads the team in targets, but Crawford leads the team in receiving yards. Clark leads the team in receiving yards. Kekoa Crawford's not too far behind at 256 yards. They're the two preferred plays for me. Crawford is a little bit cheaper than Clark. And then their tight end, Jake Tongs, is somebody maybe you could look at in tournaments. He hasn't been targeted as much lately. I think for Cal, you basically want to just focus on Crawford and Clark. For Oregon, Anthony Brown is a bit expensive for his role. He's a dual threat, but his rushing production isn't that much better than a guy like Garbers, and he doesn't have any upside as a passer, averaging just 24.5 attempts per game. Anthony Brown is on the team with the much, much higher implied team total, but that's also reflected in price. So he's just a middling play overall. In the receiving game, the top option lately has been Jalen Redd, who's averaging 4.3 targets per game over their last 4. But Johnny Johnson's been the most consistent this year. Ultimately, it's going to be a nasty rotation where you see Johnson, Ferguson, Redd, Micah Pittman, Chris Hudson, even Devin Williams all involved. And nobody in this receiving room has more than 19 targets on the season. That's a 3.8 per game average for their target leader. Just really tough to trust or find any upside there in a low volume passing attack. In the run game, CJ Verdell is out for the year. So Travis Dye projects for just immense opportunity. Saw 19 carries in their most recent game, added 5 targets. Travis Dye is going to see a vast majority of the touches in this game. They are going to use Brian Cardwell, Seven McGee, and Trey Benson. They were all listed as co-backups to Travis Dye. But still, Travis Dye just way too cheap, $6,500 for a 13.5 point favorite on a team with a nearly 34 point implied team total. You can play Dye with confidence. Last game, and our worst one on the slate, San Diego State versus San Jose State, a 41 point total. San Jose State is a 9.5 point underdog here. San Diego State plays extremely slow, extremely run heavy, just a 31% pass rate. San Jose State has been slow as well. They were pretty slow last year, but they're even slower due to inefficiency. They will throw the ball a lot, but they just don't play with any urgency. So that's where we get the 41 point total. Not to mention San Diego State's defense has been fantastic. For San Diego State, Jordan Brookshire's back at quarterback, averaging just 130 pass yards per game, 67 on the ground. He's somewhat mobile, but volume is going to be a huge issue for him. The best play for San Diego State is Greg Bell, their running back. He's averaging 19.4 touches per game, but a lot of that is hindered by a 3-touch game he saw in their second most recent game where he got banged up. He's still averaging 104 yards on the ground. The issue and the difference between Bell and most of the other rushers we talked about, like Dye, like Tucker or Torrey or Ali, is Bell has no role in the pass game. They haven't needed him in that capacity because they're an undefeated team. They played with positive game script, but 3 targets is not going to get it done in comparison to some of the other rushers here. So he's viable in tournaments, just a slight preference towards the other players that have work in the pass game. If you're targeting a pass catcher, it's probably either Jesse Matthews or Tyrell Shavers. Tyrell Shavers has the most targets in their last 3 games. He's transfer. And Matthews has been more consistent on the year, but you're talking about basically no upside. The target leader for San Diego State is Matthews with 14, probably a situation to avoid. For San Jose State, Nick Nash looks like he's going to be the starter again. They've been very quiet on Starkel status, so just make sure he's not playing. If you're looking to Nash, Nash is an excellent dual threat. He actually played receiver in their first couple games, but he's been converted back to quarterback to handle the offense here. Not much efficiency as a passer, but you can always fall back on that dual threat ability. The problem is they just have a 15.75 implied team total. So how much Nash do you want to begin with? If you're stacking, Isaiah Hamilton, Derek Deese are a bit expensive for the context of this slate, averaging just 51 and 54 receiving yards per game. They use a timeshare at running back, Tyler Nevins and Kyrie Robinson. Kyrie Robinson has taken a bit of a step back lately, but he is still their clear pass catching back. And you're going to see Shamar Garrett more as their big banger. Now, in a game where they're nearly 10-point underdogs and have a 15.75 implied team total, not something we want to get to. And this is a game overall I'm trying to avoid. Overall, we'll be focusing on the elite runners and trying to get pass catchers from the Marshall North Texas game and some one-offs here and there, maybe on Clemson, Syracuse, and the Cal Oregon game. But overall, that will do it for us. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Let me know your favorite play in the comment section. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out, and we will see you guys again next time.